Welcome to this special edition of Paranormal News. I'm your host, Bonnie Vent. Today's featured guest is Brian Zimmerman. Zombie fans would know him under the pen name of Keith Carpenter. Falling in love with puppetry and movie monster magic at a young age has made Brian Zimmerman a true zombie aficionado. Born in a small town in Texas, the highlight of his week was to go to the local cinema and catch the latest Romero zombie film. Brian's love for all things zombie and puppetry brought him to writing a movie screenplay that took the zombie genre in a brand new direction. Welcome to Paranormal News, Brian.
Well, thanks, Bonnie. It's my pleasure to be here. Absolutely. It's good to talk to you.
What inspired you to become a writer, and when did the puppetry come into play?
Well, that all started really when I was a teenager. Back when I was 14 years old, I was I was a dyslexic teenager who hated to read because I was so slow, and I was always so afraid of being called upon to read in front of the class or other kids or whatever. But I had a teacher that saw me doodling one day. I was drawing some funny characters, and I used to sit in class, when I didn't have anything else to do, and sometimes when I did have other things to do, but anyway. And I would design puppets, I would draw creepy things, monsters, all kinds of crazy things.
Wow, great.
And anyway, one day I was drawing these funny characters, and my teacher in the library basically suggested that I take the characters and write a story about them. I took her to heart, and I went home and wrote my first novel, and it was about 150 pages long. It took quite a long time to do it. But
I bet.
The puppetry actually came in before that. At the age of about 10, I got involved in puppetry and learned how to use puppets and started writing scripts and making costumes. I got really, really into it. By the time I was 12, I was doing it professionally for birthday parties and things like that. The troupe that I was a part of kind of fell apart, and I started doing it on my own. And by the time I was 16, I was doing seminars and teaching people how to start puppet troupes, and I was really, really heavily into it. And I've done that as a career for quite a long time, for about 30 years now, and I've done television and live performances, and I've been a puppet builder for years. So that all started early too, and it was the love for that, puppetry and movie animatronic monsters and movie makeup and monster makeup. And in college, I took theatrical makeup and learned how to do all the blood, guts, and gore stuff. And so I was always interested in that. It was always something that really, intrigued me. And so at a young age, I'd have to say it was that interest that caused me in my first zombie movie experience to not only be scared and grossed out, but completely curious about how people like Tom Savini and these different people that worked on a lot of those early zombie movies, made all of that stuff look so real.
So Brian, when did you first discover a love of all things zombie?
Well, that would be when my best friend, who at the time he was about 13 or 14, I was around the same age, he got a summer job at a movie theater. And he invited me to the midnight matinee, to watch it for free, the midnight matinee of Night of the Living Dead. Now, this was probably 10 years after it came out, or a little bit more, a little longer than that, maybe about 15 years after it came out. So I had heard of the movie, and I'd never seen it. It kind of had a stigma when it came out of being, having a lot of controversy around it. But I went and watched it, and I absolutely was terrified.
Me too.
Not in a way that pushed me away from it, but in a way that just made me, I was intrigued by it. And I grew up in a household where my parents liked horror movies. I grew up watching horror movies, all the movie monsters and all the creepy, movies and things that were coming out at the time. I was right on top of all of it. I mean, I watched, Chainsaw Massacre and things like that. Even as a teenager, I was not, it didn't faze me. I enjoyed it. My parents, like I said, were into that kind of stuff. So the puppetry and the love for movie monsters and animatronic monsters and things like that, that really caused me to have a tremendous interest to watch these zombie movies that like the ones Romero was doing, and just see how realistic it could look. I remember watching Romero's third movie, Day of the Dead, and watching a scene where There was a character in the movie that was fighting the zombie and knocked the zombie down and grabbed the most convenient weapon available, which was a shovel, shoved it into the zombie's mouth, and used the blade of the shovel to basically cut the zombie's head in half and pop the top of the head off, where it rolled away, and the camera followed it as it rolled. It stopped upside down, and then you saw the eyes still moving.
Ew, icky.
And it was just really disgusting and really gross, but I loved it. I was like, wow. In that same movie, there were lots of scenes where, lots of guts and zombies spread out on a, operating table and being taken apart. And it just was so fascinating to me how realistic this stuff looked. Now, I mean, you go back and look at it now, and it looks kind of cheesy, especially when you're comparing it to what people are doing today in movies. But it just really mesmerized me, and it caused me to really develop a love for zombie movies. And then later on, that turned into, just a love for reading novels, which, got me going. But that's really where the original love started. I mean, I started collecting zombie movies, in my early to mid 20s, and especially since I've moved here to Asia, I've given Amazon.com a whole lot of business.
I bet.
Just because it's hard to get some of those movies here, so I have to order them there. But I've got quite a collection now, and I just I don't know. I've always loved them ever since I was a kid, and to this day, I get excited when a new good zombie movie comes out.
Wow, great. You have 2 zombie books recently released. Can you tell us a little bit about each story?
Wow. Well, how much time do you have, Bonnie? Because I can go on all day.
Not that much, Brian.
Seriously, though. Well, the first book that came out that I was just talking about earlier is Zombie Circus, that was based on the screenplay. Zombie Circus is basically a story about a little Bible Belt town in the U.S. that back in 1946, Circus rolls into town, and there's a very self-righteous preacher kind of character that hates circuses, thinks they're full of ne'er-do-wells and drug addicts and prostitutes and that sort of thing. So he decides to run the circus out of town. Well, anyway, a mob gathers, and they decide they're going to run the circus out of town, and they end up burning it to the ground and killing everyone. It's kind of an accident, sort of, but not really an accident. And but what little do they know is that the ringmaster of that circus, who's kind of a snake oil salesman, had procured this elixir that was supposed to give you longevity when you used it correctly, but that had a horrible curse that caused the dead to come back to life. Well, anyway, to cover up the crime, the preacher basically buries all the bodies and rolls the ringmaster's wagon, that's the only thing that survives the fire, on top of this mass grave, and boards up the wagon and puts a sign up that says, "Do not open, this is cursed by God," kind of thing. Well, it sits there and gets overgrown by the forest and the trees and the vines, and 60 years later our story continues. So another circus comes into this sleepy little town. Now remember, it's 60 years later. And the guy who runs this circus, unlike the other ringmaster, is hated by everyone in the circus. He's a total jerk. He's an ex-con. And he's the kind of guy that would sell his grandmother for $1. So anyway, while the circus is getting set up, he ends up snooping around. He finds the old ringmaster's wagon. He finds, and he's also crippled because he was in a fight, got beat up in prison really bad, and he's got kind of a gimpy leg and a withered hand, and he's paralyzed partially. And he finds this elixir and inadvertently, accidentally trying to pop the cork off, gets some in his mouth, and is instantly healed. And his girlfriend, who's one of the circus performers, is with him. And anyway, so he decides he wants to run away from the circus and use this miracle cure, sell it, and make a mint. Well, she doesn't want to leave the circus, and they end up getting in a big argument, and he accidentally kills her, slaps her with his newly reanimated hand, and just slaps the crap out of her and kills her on accident.
Ouch.
So thinking, he's an ex-con, oh my God, what's he going to do? He decides, well, if this elixir healed his paralysis, maybe it'll heal her. So he, pours it down her throat, and voila, what happens? She gets brought back to life. Well, of course, she kills him completely. And the thing is there's like a crate of these little bottles of this elixir that have been sitting there for 60 years. Well, in the process of killing him and ripping him to shreds, all this elixir gets broken, all the bottles get broken, and the elixir seeps through the floorboards of this wagon onto this mass grave that's got the old ringmaster, all of the old circus performers, different clowns, the ventriloquist, because it was actually the earlier one was actually a freak show in Circus, so there's quite a few circus freak type characters in it. So anyway, they all come to life and basically wreak havoc on this circus and the little town that it's in, and turn many of the people into zombies. And there's a small group of survivors, and also our hero and his friends, who basically have to survive the night of this crazy circus full of zombies. And it's really interesting because it is a zombie movie slash zombie novel, but it's really interesting. I mean, it's just a really good story that just happens to have zombies in it. At least that's how I look at it. I really like the story and the characters. The characters are very strong, and they're just a lot. It's actually a lot of fun too. It is a horror novel, but it does have its moments. Some of the characters bring a lot of levity at moments into the story, and
funny zombies, huh?
I don't know. It's a really interesting story with a lot of zombies in it. Now, the second story is different, because I purposely didn't want Zombie Circus to be your traditional end of the world zombie apocalypse. Everyone's dead except a few survivors that are fighting the horde of reanimated corpses that basically have taken over the earth. I didn't really want it to be that kind of story. But after I wrote it, I actually got an idea for another novel, which is Freeze Dried: The Awakening, that is more along those lines. And it's a really cool story. It does take place as a sort of apocalyptic kind of atmosphere, but it's basically about a guy who gets put in cryogenic sleep because he's got a brain tumor, and his doctor, who's also his childhood friend, says, "Look," and the guy's very, very wealthy, and he says, "Look, there's nothing that can cure you right now. That we can't do anything for you. You're basically just going to have to, survive until you have an aneurysm and the thing explodes in your head and you're dead." And he says, "But because you're my friend, and because I know you've got more money than you know what to do with, I will tell you that there is a possible alternative for you." And he suggests to his friend that there is this place called Eternal Slumber that is a company that does cryogenic stasis, and they could possibly put you to sleep for a price, put you to sleep, and awaken you later when there is some sort of medical technology to help you get rid of this brain tumor. So anyway, he gets put to sleep, and our story starts 16 years later when he is rudely awakened prematurely from his stasis, and he's awakened to find this place, Eternal Slumber, this hospital slash cryogenic salon, in ruins, and dead bodies laying around and all this, what have you. He ends up finding the zombie corpse of the doctor that had put him in stasis, and listens to his personal log and finds out what had happened. And apparently, due to some changes in the chemical that they use for putting people in stasis, and the fact that they chose to use a low-cost alternative, they find out that didn't really work. It actually killed their people in stasis and brought them back to life, and they became zombies and they started killing people. Anyway, our hero wakes up in this world that has basically been taken over by zombies, and has quite an adventure trying to survive. And he finds other survivors along the way. And anyway, I mean, I don't want to give things away, but it's basically it's kind of a fresh story, but it does take place in that post-apocalyptic zombie Holocaust type of world. And I actually, as a matter of fact, today was sitting down with a producer here that is interested in actually turning that into a movie.
Wow, that's awesome. We'll be on the lookout for that. If you would, can you tell the listeners where they can find you and where they can locate your books?
Well, I would invite anyone who would like to visit my website, and that is www.zombienovelsbykeithcarpenter.weebly.com. Or you can just go to Amazon.com and you can type in the title of the book, Zombie Circus or Freeze Dried The Awakening, and you can order them from there. And I would love to hear feedback from anyone. And my email address is freezedriedtheawakening@gmail.com.
It was great having you as our special guest. Thanks very much, Brian.
Well, Bonnie, it was absolutely my pleasure. And I hope we can do it again sometime real soon.